here. Imagination Connoisseurs, once again, it is I on a Friday. The sanctimonious notorious RMB here coming at you for Robservations, the show about something. Robservations live chat number 204. Unbelievable. I can't believe it. Getting into the 200s. Crazy. I wish my own life could get into the 200s, but as everyone knows, I'm middle-aged with one foot in the grave. So that's never going to happen. But it could if I was living 100 years from now. Perhaps. You never know. Today is a great day, comrades, as we sail into history. That's right. The Three Musketeers have become four again. As you know, Robservations has the greatest moderating staff in the history of moderating staffs. And our errant knight, or as I like to call him, D'Artagnan, has joined the Three Musketeers. Once again, we are a full complement of four moderators. So everybody give a warm welcome, a warm hug, a round of applause, or whatever he might want, to Terry Flynn. Terry Flynn, ladies and gentlemen, is back. Our man in the UK. He was off on what I heard was a Grail quest. You'll have to ask him if he found the Grail or not. And if you are looking for the Grail, of course, I'd like to remind you that Swag Props at their Etsy store, you can buy a perfect replica of Henry Jones's Grail diary from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade from our man Swag Props all the way over in Malaysia. The man does great work. By the way, he didn't pay me to say that. He didn't. He really didn't. I think his work is amazing, and you should all check it out because it's great. And he's an imagination connoisseur, and he makes cool stuff. So that's cool for me. As you all know, who does bring you these chats is Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And as you all know, say it with me, if you go to their website at where? GetLuckyTiger.com and you buy any of their products, when you check out, you can punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, and you will get 20% off your order. And as you also know, through Labor Day here in the United States, Lucky Tiger is having the Lucky Tiger Tailgating giveaway. And they are giving away, get this, over $500 worth of tailgating swag, including a grill. That's right. Be the envy of all your friends outside of your favorite football game, your favorite stadium, whatever venue you like to watch the men on the gridiron. You can be an amazing tailgater if you just go and win their giveaway. And I guess you don't win it. You get picked. You can't say win, I guess. I don't know. But it's still pretty cool. I wish I could enter. I can't, which is a bummer. But $500 worth of swag, including a grill, go to either GetLuckyTiger.com or ClubLuckyTiger.com. Well, guess what? D23 is this weekend. For those of you who don't know, unlike Comic-Con, Disney has their own shindig where it's always in August where they unfurl. They generate the hype. The Disney hype machine goes into full-on hyperdrive, just like the Millennium Falcon trying to escape the Death Star. And it's, and they'll tell you about that because at D23, not only do they have Marvel, Pixar, Star Wars, and the rest of Disney. We'll find all out about Frozen 2, I'm sure. But D23 is a big deal. And there's a lot of rumors floating around that, hey, maybe they put the Sony Marvel deal back together. Who knows? I have no idea. I have no inside information. I don't even have any insight. I'm just going to lay back and enjoy the show and watch the information spew forth on the internet this weekend. I will say this. They put out a trailer for a trailer. They put out a poster or a key art image for The Mandalorian, which it made me salivate. Very much reminiscent of a Man with No Name type of a vibe, maybe a Lone Samurai. I'm telling you, I haven't been this excited for anything Star Wars since, I don't know, The Last Jedi, then maybe Solo. But I'm damn excited for The Mandalorian. It is coming out, and the scene that I watched that bootleg scene a million times when we meet The Mandalorian taking a job from Werner Herzog, man, that show looks cool. And let's face it, whenever a door opens in the Star Wars universe and there is a gonk droid right there, you know you're in the hands of people who know what they're doing. Gonk. I mean, come on. That's the best thing, people. We're living in a wondrously charmed age. Aside from the fact that our economy is falling apart and global warming is ravaging the planet. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe so. But that's always going on. There's always some kind of apocalyptic thing happening, and we always seem to get out of it, usually. But there's a lot of great stuff going on. If you're a fan of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, we got It Part 2 coming out. It's like 3 hours long. People are saying it's not perfect. What's really funny about the early social media reactions to It Chapter 2 is they're saying, well, it's good, and there's lots of great scares, but it's not great. Well, here's the thing, people. The book wasn't great. The book was overlong, and the book was, I liked the book, but there's a lot of wacky stuff in it. It didn't change my life the way, say, The Stand changed my life. Now, I think everybody should read it. I still have my first mass market edition that I bought off the shelf in the summer of 1986, and I'm telling you, I love it. And but it, you know, it is what it is. It's going to be great. But you got It coming down the pike. I don't know if you guys have watched the trailer for the new Guillermo del Toro produced Antlers, but that looks dope. If you're a horror fan, my God, does that look good. So we got a lot of great stuff. That Mandalorian poster got me all at Twitter. It gave me the vapors. I'm telling you, it certainly did. I mean, I got Terry back as a moderator, along with Detective Jim, along with Greg Smith, and along with the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, Mayor of Riverdale, Iowa. I don't know if they're all in the house. They look like they're all in the house. I got Greg, Terry, and Jim. I think Mike, Mike had to do his like mayorly duties today. He had to take like some city comptroller out for his last lunch because he was retiring and got a new job. So I got 3 of the 4 Musketeers here. I'm so happy to have them. You moderators make this place what it is. And by the way, Detective Jim, I always feel like I'm being judged because he is a detective. And I'm, if you haven't watched Mindhunter, if you guys, I've always been obsessed with serial killers, books like that. Ever since I think it was Thomas Harris's Red Dragon that I read initially because Stephen King reviewed it in Fangoria magazine. And I have a first edition hardcover that I got later, but I bought that paperback and it had that cool foil shiny cover on it. I think it did. That's how I remember it anyway. And when you think about the fact that Red Dragon came out in 1982 and Mindhunter, the first 2 seasons of Mindhunter have dealt with the very beginning of the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Division that really started in 79 to 81. And Thomas Harris was all about meticulously researching all of this. And I would love to find out, like, did he interview John Douglas? How far down the rabbit hole did he go before he wrote, which is probably the Gone with the Wind of serial predator books. I mean, in the first Red Dragon, you meet both Hannibal Lecter and Francis Dollarhide, the Tooth Fairy. And that book has now been adapted to screen 3 different times. First by Michael Mann in the mid-'80s. Then, of course, famously, after Anthony Hopkins played Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, Brett Ratner directed another film version of it where it wasn't called Manhunter, it was called Red Dragon, finally. And Ed Norton played Will Graham. And Harvey Keitel, I believe, was Jack Crawford, I think, if I remember it. Of course, Ray Fiennes, my man Ray Fiennes, played Francis Dollarhide. I wasn't a big fan of that. And then, of course, Brian Fuller adapted Red Dragon once again within the 3 seasons of Hannibal, which I think is one of the greatest horror shows on television ever. But all of that is an aside. And I don't even know. I'm rambling today because why not? It's Friday, right? I'm going to go down and get my sear heel with my friends because it's Friday. Bringing back those old memes right here on Robservations. Anyway, I got this great letter. First of all, kudos to all of you because the letters that are coming over the transom are incredible letters. And now you guys are starting to respond to each other. So I've got a lot of great letters from many of our mainstays that we love. I also, yes, indeed, I have a Willow Yang letter. There's so many great letters. I couldn't even read and get to all the letters that have come in over the last 24 hours, which is amazing. But I did get a letter from somebody named Joel Summers, and I think I've read something from him before, but perhaps not. But Joel did what I like. I love when letter writers respond to other letter writers. I love those kinds of letters because it shows, if nothing else, we are building a community. And this letter is in response to Franz's letter. Franz also wrote me another letter, but Franz's letter that was pretty divisive here at Robservations. But I really like this letter. And the reason I wanted to read this letter, and one of the things I wanted to talk about today, was I hear this all the time. Since I've been on the internet spewing forth gobbledygook about all geek interests and things about the post-geek singularity world that we live in, I've always heard from fans, almost universally, not all fans, but certain fans, that they don't like to talk about politics when you're talking about, say, comic book characters or Star Trek or Star Wars or something. And I've never understood that. I've never understood that because all science fiction is inherently political. There's always, whether it's mostly technological, but science fiction has always been political. It always has, all the way back to, well, you'll hear it in the letter. Star Wars is about rebels trying to take down an empire. I mean, it literally is about politics. And to not want, I mean, I get why people don't want to discuss politics because they think that they're going to get into an argument about Democrats versus the Republicans. I understand. What they don't want to do is they don't want to get involved in current politics of the day while they're discussing Jonathan Hickman's crazy run on X-Men. I get that. If you're reading Power of X and House of X, who doesn't want to? Who wants to talk politics of the day? Probably nobody. Even though the very fabric of the X-Men, this whole thing about a marginalized group who has been discriminated against, indeed, in one of the great comic graphic novels of all time, God Loves, Man Kills, which is one of my favorite X-Men stories. Mutants are being hunted to death. And so there's always been an element of politics in genre fiction all the time. I mean, thinly veiled. It doesn't matter what it's about. I mean, everyone knows A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, is one of the great queer films ever made. One of the great LGBT films ever made. If you know, I bet some people are going, what? Well, look it up. Punch in LGBTQ, Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Go down that rabbit hole. Very interesting. So all genre cinema is talking about some kind of politics in some way, some more overtly than others. I was cheeky with the thumbnail of this chat because I used Eye of the Beholder, which is, of course, one of the most iconic episodes of the original Twilight Zone. If you haven't seen it, my thumbnail has spoiled the reveal for you, but it's been, well, the Twilight Zone ran from 1959 to 1964. Why haven't you watched it? We're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Twilight Zone this year. There's so many great anniversaries of films in 2019, especially great genre cinema. So, you know, anyway, I got this great letter from Joel Summers. I really liked it a lot, and I'm going to read it. And I've got a bunch of letters that take a political bent today, but always. Oh, by the way, I also would like to correct myself from yesterday. Yes, it's true. I am not. I make mistakes. You know, I'm trying to pull out from all of my arcane knowledge. I say things, and sometimes I mess up. And when I get called on it, so much the better. I was wrong about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And once again, thanks to Ted Van Dyne for getting me this Blu-ray disc from the Disney Movie Club, which I'm not a member of. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was not Disney's first live action feature. I I knew that actually. It was a brain fart, but I said it was. It's not. And it was pointed out to me, Treasure Island was Disney's first live action feature. 1950s Treasure Island. This came out a few years later. It's a much superior film in my book. But anyway, still, this movie remains one of the greatest fantasy films of all time, and science fiction movies. And this movie's incredibly political, just so you know, all about politics. Captain Nemo would be fighting global warming by blowing up ships today if he were alive and the Nautilus was real. Thankfully, it isn't. Actually, it would be cool if it was, though. Anyway, Joel Summers, I'm going to just launch into his letter. And I warn you, it is a long letter. So strap in, kids. Strap in. And boy, I can't wait to see what happens for Terry's return. Triumphant return as a moderator. He could be out on a Friday night, going to bars, hanging out, going to a movie, having a nice dinner. But no, he's here with you for his big return. And I'm just going to launch right into it. So here you go, moderators. Once again, I give the floor to Mr. Joel Summers. Hi, Rob. I'm writing in response to Franz, the author of Tuesday night's brilliant Andy Kaufman art piece Letter. It was near perfect satire. Franz had me going until the very end, when he tipped his hand by admonishing our entertainers to stick to entertaining and stay out of politics. A superb way to spotlight how the exact opposite played out in 2016 when we elected the entertainer president whose administration continues to play like daily episodes of a nightmare reality TV show. Bravo, Franz. Assuming Franz was trolling with parody, the bulk of this letter is directed not at the gruff but lovable, bipedally challenged Breitbart bisexual, but instead to all the folks who heard Franz's letter and answered their TV or computer by yelling, "Fuck yeah," unironically. Franz's letter had way too many single points to address individually, but there was one main argument used as a framework for its entirety, and I'm going to tackle that overarching thesis. It's a very familiar complaint. I hear it over and over from both sides of the proverbial aisle. Perhaps you've also heard it once or twice, Rob. It goes something like this. The quality of today's science fiction is plummeting because it has become overly politicized. Good stories and great characters are being replaced by agenda-driven narratives and diversity caricatures. It insults the audience and marginalizes the very demographic who have been the most reliable supporters and consumers of genre content. Finally, something we can agree on, right? I mean, aren't we all just so tired of the brand new problem of politics corroding our genre fiction? Franz put it so well when he said, Star Wars used to be an apolitical franchise. Yes, Franz, and how we long for a return to those halcyon times before politics crept into a galaxy far, far away. In fact, let's go back in time and find the moment just before the social justice virus first infected the science fiction operating system. We can use that point in time as a restore point and reboot our sci-fi OS back to its pre-political state. But when was that moment? When did science fiction become politicized? The most obvious moment in the recent past, when the alien ovipositor of diversity first deposited its social justice warrior eggs into the belly of good science fiction, is the debut of Star Trek Discovery. This show is spilling over with egregious examples of a beloved science fiction franchise failing to deliver good Star Trek to fans. This program is bad enough to make fans feel actively insulted. Online, it's almost settled history that among so many problems, the lead actor is one of the biggest for this show. Diversity casting has purged all of the vestiges of good character, logical plot, and respect for fans. Unfortunately, Star Trek Discovery didn't start the problem of politicizing our sci-fi, did it? Let's go back to the 90s, when a Delta Quadrant dirigible began transmitting its roided-out diversity agenda by giving us black Vulcans. And I mean, I'm pretty sure people were fucking holograms on that show. This is disappointing. How far back do we need to go before we get to science fiction that is decoupled from politics? There's no need to stop until we get a pre-Star Trek timeline, because it turns out that franchise was born into episodes written as heavy-handed political parables that took things on like the Vietnam War and interracial kissing. Not the Twilight Zone either. There are literally college courses. Tallulah is, of course, political. There are literally college courses dedicated to parsing the politics in Rod Serling's classic anthology series. I'm starting to panic a little because even H.G. Wells' The Time Machine was a pretty blatant critique of classism in a society bifurcated into an overclass and an underclass. Gulliver's Travels, Jonathan Swift wrote that and A Most Modest Proposal as a thinly veiled anti-government rallying literature. Dante's Inferno, the Iliad, and the fucking Odyssey? Gosh, Rob, I'm at a loss. I began with an assumption almost universally accepted that politics is ruining our science fiction. And yet, when we actually look at the entire history of the genre, it's like science fiction never existed without some kind of political patina. And that's my point. I want fandom to get woke to the truth of science fiction. It was always political. It was never apolitical. A political frame is a structural requirement to create speculative fiction. Speculation is the development of a viewpoint, a point of view, a worldview. There is no science fiction without politics. Air France, who I absolutely picture a la Peter Sellers as Dr. Strangelove, claimed that Star Wars was apolitical until the new trilogy. Rob correctly pointed out the first movie's opening sequence that established Leia Organa as brave and tough, instantly a feminist icon. The Phantom Menace was plagued by troubling comparisons of a certain Gungan's comedic tics mapped onto racially unhelpful archetypes. I think the politics of Star Wars reached their apex not in The Last Jedi, but in Revenge of the Sith. Here, Bush-era slogans are spoken through the mouths of Anakin, Palpatine, and many others. There are literally scenes of a Senate voting wartime powers to a leader consolidating power. It's laughable to be offended by The Last Jedi if you're triggered by science fiction with politics that seem clumsy or obvious, defining the prequels in some ways. At this point, I can almost hear Franz yelling at me in that Dr. Strangelove voice, Sorry, I'm not even going to do the voice. Sorry, Joel, but even if I accept that science fiction is inherently political, you can't tell me that the problem with The Last Jedi or Captain Marvel is anything other than social justice warrior overlay atop the stories. Sure I can. The problems people have with those movies are not politics. It's bad writing. That's worth repeating. Today's science fiction suffers not from diversity casting, but from what can almost always be traced back to bad writing and poor plotting. Not forced representation, not stealth agenda box ticking. Creators are doing a lazy job, or maybe a hackneyed one, or perhaps doing a job compromised by corporate projections or focus group bullet points. I'm sure it's all of that and more, but it's almost never the fault of some imagined social justice warrior diversity agenda. And it's also almost never the fault of the actors. Those actors nonetheless get blamed by viewers who feel aggrieved by being asked to believe non-white male actors can credibly perform roles that white dudes have played in the past. Much of fandom has been arguing about this, so it's not just Franz, which is why I provided the following test that anyone can perform on pieces of genre fiction believed to be infected with a social justice warrior political bend. I've broken what I call the privilege flip test into the following numbered steps and include examples for each. They are as follows. 1. You've just watched or read something and are convinced it has been social justified. Imagine one of the scenes that strongly activated your social justice warrior spider sense. It has to be a scene that includes the non-male, non-white, or non-straight actor or actors who were chosen not for their skill, but because their ethno-gender identity advances social justice and abandons any criteria of competence or work ethic. If possible, this exercise works best when the scene also includes interaction with an actor who is actually played by a white, apparently straight male actor. My example will be The Last Jedi, and I'm going to use several scenes that include the characters Rey and Luke. 2. Now in your mind, apply the privilege flip by swapping out the current social justice warrior actor for literally any white, apparently straight male actor. In my example, I'm going to replace Daisy Ridley with Casper Van Dien. Also, if your scene has one in it, apply an equal but opposite privilege flip to the other white dude by replacing him with a member of any social justice warrior approved marginalized group. In my example, I'm going to swap out Mark Hamill with Rachel Maddow. But you don't have to use a lesbian. You can use any social justice warrior identity you want. So make a choice you feel good about. 3. With the new actors in place, it's now time to replay the scene in your mind. Pay special attention to the beats and moments you found especially bad. Presumably the same things that alerted you to quality holes poked in the production by the leveling hand of identity politics. As I mentioned, I'm actually going to run through several different scenes in my example because I believe The Last Jedi has several moments that are bad. First, I'm viewing my key moments with Rachel Maddow playing Luke, throwing a lightsaber over her shoulder, suckling the green milk, admitting to kinda sorta becoming a deadbeat dad to the Jedi Order, and finally flashing back to her almost murder of little Ben Solo, the moment when Kylo Ren was born. Finally, as I mentally review the key scenes containing the other actor for my example, Casper Van Dien, as Rey. This is the critical moment in my test. This is when I will conform or deny my theory that diversity casting has ruined this production. So here we go. Casper Van Dien playing Rey. Right off the bat, I'm imagining him talking with a bad British accent, which sucks. But this probably isn't fair, so I'm taking that back out. Now, I watch Casper just weirdly knowing how to use the Force like a fucking natural-born Jedi, despite having little or no training. Next, I check out the vaguely sexual Force Skype calls between Casper and Adam Driver. And wait a second, I did not expect this, but the swap does seem to be helping this scene. I'm thinking it may actually be an improvement, but as I remember Kylo's sternum height capri pants, I realized I'm mistaken, and yes, this still sucks. Finally, as I watch Casper and Kylo teaming up to fight Snoke's Imperial Guard, beautifully choreographed in total Jet Li Deep Force synergy, this scene still delights me. But I'm neither more or less enthralled by who is playing Ray here. It's a badass scene. To close out, I imagine Casper moving rocks at the end while having had no meaningful character arc over the whole film. He made no mistakes of consequence and learned no painful lessons. It's time to look at the results of my test to determine if The Last Jedi is bad because Kathleen Kennedy forced a cast upon it that advanced a political agenda, or if it's bad because it was badly written. While the homoerotic aspect between Casper and Kylo did move the needle slightly, it wasn't even enough to consider changing the way I regard this movie. It's still guilty of crimes against logic, character, dialogue, expectations, and general disrespect to its fans. Changing the actors has done almost nothing to improve this movie. This test has proven that bad writing, not social justice warrior casting, is the culprit. And that's how you perform the privilege flip test to detect toxic diversity casting. Where does that leave us? In a place where anyone who believed it was Michael Burnham ruining Star Trek Discovery and not the writers must now ask themselves, why did they think otherwise? They should be asking themselves, why were they so convinced that changing an actor's color or gender would suddenly fix problems? People who are distracted into frustration or anger when confronted by non-white dudes in genre fiction are certain they are simply witnessing the agenda of someone else being realized. I'm saying that their inability to not notice what color or gender an actor happens to be while delivering lines poorly written or acting through a plot badly conceived is a good moment to do some introspection. It's inappropriate and impossible for me to put a label to what problems they may find if they undertake such self-reflection, but I hope they will do it. I've had many moments in my life where I was confronted by something that at first seemed to be external, a circumstance that made me feel something strange or uncomfortable, something that after some honest soul searching turned out to be something I was doing, saying, or believing. For example, and very recently, I stopped using the word bitch playfully when a friend told me it wasn't really cool. My first reaction was dismiss her as overly sensitive. But what's up with that reaction? How am I hurt by not using the word anymore? And who the fuck am I to tell her why her opinion is less correct about using the word bitch than mine is? This is the kind of thing all human beings do all the time, and as a result, history always bends toward progress. I realize this has gotten long, but I wanted to mention just one more thing. Franz talked about the movie Black Panther and said this film's appeal to people of color seemed mysterious to him. So it's probably also mysterious to folks for whom Franz was the interlocutor. I'm not African American, but that film excited me and totally tapped into the way it felt when that movie was buzzing the world. Speaking only for myself, the movie was an extended cultural moment that lasted for months. So it misses the point to collapse understanding into a movie review. I actually was underwhelmed with the movie itself, the third act especially, but that's stunningly beside the point. The months-long reign of Black Panther was awesome. It was an all-black cast acting in a movie directed by a black man, but made with a giant white studio executive budget, and it turned a mind-blowing profit. It made all the money. It got bodies into movie theaters who didn't normally go, doing work for both cinema and comic books and movies. Franz didn't see any real difference between Blade and Black Panther, leaving him confused as to why so much love was bestowed upon Black Panther and not Blade. It's because one movie had a modest budget, no trail of record-breaking prior movies to live up to, and also no special sauce to entice new fans into the genre by presenting a cast that looked like them. I believe Blade got made because the rights to the character were not as thorny as most other comic book superheroes of the time. I don't know how much money Blade made, but I'm sure it was probably enough to justify sequels, so that's a success, no doubt. But was it a game changer? A record breaker? Did it overturn all the old ideas about what kind of actors could elevate a movie into four-quadrant appeal? Did it force movie makers to consider that things not previously feasible has become possible, marketable? Black Panther was a tectonic event that shook world entertainment. It proved the financial viability of projects carried by people of color. It opened a consumer demographic previously untapped. And none of that includes how it may have affected people personally, although I found the phenomenon pretty great. But Black Panther did something else that I personally believe was its most difficult task and also its greatest victory. This was a movie that told a transcendent, relatable story that was also really a Black story. Ryan Coogler's script was a masterclass in narrative because despite all the relatable human drama that got audiences to the theaters again and again, the story was driven by the experiences of being African or African American. The characters served a story that lost all meaning unless they were Black and unless it took place within an African country. Arguable, the movie's best character is its villain, who is profoundly damaged and then weaponized, partially because of his experience growing up Black. The hero struggles over if he should allow the world to view his country through a lens that makes assumptions about all the African countries and is in some ways using racialized expectations of Africa as a camouflage and has to atone for this mistake. That is just next level storytelling. But if we acknowledge Black Panther only works with its Black actors in African countries, then doesn't it fail the actor swap test we just discussed? Doesn't it stand as proof that diversity casting is a thing? And anyway, why aren't the people who are pearl clutching over The Last Jedi still losing their minds over Black Panther? It's arguably the very worst example of diversity casting. It unapologetically leaned into its own racial exclusivity. Why would Captain Marvel or Star Trek or The Last Jedi ever be cited ahead of Black Panther in the project to indict diversity casting? It's because of good writing. Good writing makes everything else possible, natural, essential, and magical. If the writing is bad, then the actors seem tokenized. If the writing is good, the actors seem perfect. It's really that simple. If Star Trek Discovery was well written, we wouldn't think the gender or race of its lead character was weird or distracting. So pinning the blame for a production's quality problems onto the gender and race of its actors is almost always unhelpful and wrong. It's also pretty easy to understand why folks might think pinning the blame for a production's problems onto the actor's race or gender is kind of bigoted. With apologies for the length of this letter, I'll conclude by recapping the 3 points I hope Franz and his cadre will consider. First, remember that infusing politics into science fiction cannot hurt science fiction because science fiction is inherently political. Second, bad writing and plotting are what do the real damage to science fiction. And finally, if some people mistake problems with sci-fi as related mostly to race or gender and not to writing and plot, it's not crazy when other people think that diagnosis is weirdly bigoted or racist or misogynist. Rob, thanks for what you do. Keep preaching the good news of a fandom that respects all of its members and listens when anyone talks. And that letter comes from Joel Summers. Now, first of all, I will say this. Joel, I love this letter, and I agree with most of the things that you had to say. I really thought you spelled it out well. I really like the idea of the swap test that you give us here. But please, with being as a very great writer that you are and you make cogent points, when talking about other people that have written letters, we must be respectful. I mean, Franz's letter, if nothing else, inspired you to write this great letter. And now there's a back and forth, but the getting personal with other letter writers, I can't hang with. But I read your letter, I didn't edit it, and I'm not saying this to put you off. I just want to say, look, part of the reason that we're all here is so we can share opinions and share ideas without attacking people personally. Although I do think you're quite the wordsmith, and I hope you write in more letters. I really like this letter because, when it comes right down to it, I felt the same way that Joel feels, that it's always about writing. Science fiction is inherently a literary genre. It's always been a literary genre. It's very heady in terms of its concepts, and it requires good science fiction, and science fiction fans are inherently pretty smart people. I mean, you'd have to be. Now, I understand science fiction wrapped in an escapist bow, like with, say, Star Wars, we might not see it that way. But as someone like myself who's been reading the great canon of literary works since I was 10 in the science fiction genre, it's hard when I see bad science fiction. It really bothers me. And I really like the fact that you pointed out the Iliad and the Odyssey and Gulliver's Travels and all of those things. I mean, you could say Gilgamesh or whatever. There is such a rich tradition of fantasy literature, horror literature, science fiction literature that really is some of the headiest stuff that you can read. And I grew up thinking science fiction, even watching Twilight Zone and Star Trek. I understood it was political, and there's nothing wrong with politics. We should understand what are the systems with which our society and other societies have worked in and around. So I really liked your letter a lot. That's why I wanted to read it. But Franz inspired you to write this. So our man Franz here, you might not have agreed with what he had to say, but he did inspire you to write this letter, and that has value. And that's what I think is cool about our community here. And I really like, one of my favorite things is seeing a lot of back and forth between letter writers. And as always, we're a little behind. These letters are always up on the Burnettwork website, burnettwork.net. The website's getting incredible traffic lately, and we really are building a community. And I want to thank you all for that. And the letters just keep coming. I'm going to read. The show's not over, folks. I got more to read. I'm sure Terry is like holding his head in his hands going, what's going on? But Terry, I wanted to make it worth your while since we got you back. James Ito here says, I watched Star Trek the Motion Picture for the first time, and I wept when Kirk was approaching the Enterprise. Best 5 minutes of Goldsmith fanfare. Well, James, I'm glad you liked the whole movie. I wondered, did you watch the Blu-ray version, or were you able to get your hands on the standard def director's cut? That is my preferred version of the movie, but because there's just so much more in it, and you really get a sense of the Spock story that isn't inherently in the theatrical version. But I'm glad you got to watch it. That's amazing. How very cool. JB Bonifacio, apparently I missed this yesterday. And he says, I watched Get Him to the Greek. Everybody is in it. It's true, JB. I'm glad you watched that. Thank you for doing that. I love Get Him to the Greek. I love Forgetting Sarah Marshall, but I actually really love Get Him to the Greek. I think it's amazing. JB Bonifacio also says, if Ewan comes out for Obi-Wan, I'll be hyped. So will I, man. I will absolutely be hyped. It will be great. Now, there's a couple more letters that are rebuttals to other letters. And here's another long letter. And this one comes from longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community and someone who has participated quite a bit, both in the chats and writing letters. This comes from Mark C. Mark Chure. Dear Rob, I felt a need to rebuttal Ace's letter that rebutted mine. Funny enough, I think he's wrong, but for the right reasons, just wrong eras. This gets pretty long. From his inception to 1985, Superman was the character and Clark was the affectation. Superman was very one-dimensional, almost the perfect Gary Stu. Heck, he once blew out a star like a birthday candle. In 1986, all of that changed. That was the year John Byrne came on to write and draw the character for the next 2 years. With his run, the character dynamic was flipped. No longer was Superman the character. He was now the affectation. A costume designed to be the hero in need who would disappear once trouble was averted. Clark Kent was the actual character now. The name Superman was given to him by Lois, and it stuck. While Clark had rather kept helping from the shadows, he was now public and simply didn't fight what the public accepted as his name. Outside the costume and eventually around other heroes, he was Clark. Here, gotta be himself, emotionally dealing with all of the obstacles that every other human must, and some that are very unique to him. With this new reboot, Martha and Jonathan are kept alive as his parents, giving him that upbringing and reinforcement similar to what we saw in the Smallville series, just as his letter stated. Making Clark the character gave him a depth and complexity he hadn't had up until that point. Clark is not infallible. There are storylines in the comic and even in the animated Justice League where Clark's moral center has him make the wrong choice for the right reason. When you try and live a life that's as morally black and white as possible, navigating the grays can be a challenge. As recent as DC's Rebirth, we got to see Clark as a father to a son who is just discovering his powers. thus adding another layer of humanity to him as he worried over his child like any father would. But you take issue with the character as he has been written over the last year, and what can I say? Bendis doesn't seem to understand the character, in my humble opinion. Through good writing and bad, you must remember, as I stated in my original letter, the character and his adventures are morality tales for adolescent boys, not the psychological dissections of grown men. As to why he would be a savior, most of us live our lives and take on work that caters to our gifts. In Clark's case, his powers, humanity, and morality gave him a path that was practically destiny. Pertaining to Man of Steel, the film, we get a Superman who doesn't seem to follow much, if not any of this. Sure, it's a different take, but at some point it's no longer an adaptation, but something completely different. The film is made worse with bad writing. Take the tornado scene. I've had dogs and cats as pets for my whole life. These animals all have a well-developed warning system, the fight or flight instinct. There isn't a dog I've owned that wouldn't have shot out of the car and ran for its life as soon as that door opened. And yes, dogs can sense bad weather. Furthermore, as much as every animal I've had, has been a part of the family, if it came down to a choice of my father or my dog, fuck the dog. As a teenager with super strength and speed, my father is going nowhere. Bad writing example number 2. At the end of the film, Superman is seen crashing a military drone right in front of the general. He then tells the general that he knows they are trying to discover where he hangs his hat. The general responds with concern as to whether Superman has America's best interests at heart. Then, like a dumbass, Superman tells the general that he grew up in Kansas and is as American as it gets. Here's a question. Did Superman and the military not just have a battle in Smallville, Kansas? I'm no detective, and I realize that military intelligence can be an oxymoron, but if I were the general, I think I could put it together. On top of that, if the IHOP manager rolled over on Clark to a Snoopy reporter, how does he stand up to military questioning? As to the comment that Superman is a hero for the alt-right, I can only assume this was intended as a jab towards me. Let me give a history lesson. I am a conservative who has lived in Louisiana most of his 46 years. In 1992, the Republican incumbent lost the primary election, which left a runoff between two candidates, right out of a villain's handbook. The Republican candidate was true alt-right. He was none other than card-carrying member and grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, he writes here, Ku Klux Klan, David Duke. Duke was an amazing debater, great speaker, and said all the things a conservative would want to hear. Running against him was former Louisiana Governor Democrat Edwin Edwards. Before the election, under his previous term, he was caught on videotape paying off state representatives to legalize gambling, and again on tape accepting bribes from people looking to get one of the gambling licenses. At the time of the election, the case was ongoing. Edwards' campaign slogan was simple. Yes, I'm a crook. At least you know what I'm capable of. You don't know what Duke will do. Edwards' slogan stuck in my brain. It's the only time in my life I voted for a Democrat. Keeping an alt-right racist like Duke out of office was that important to me. Can we please leave the mudslinging to the politicians and not here in the letters? Sincerely, Mark C. Well, Mark, once again, a fantastic letter. And like with the previous letter, you talk about writing and how important writing is to these characters. And I agree. The letter writing amongst the mudslinging again amongst letter writers will not stand. And I'm allowing it because we're making this point. And what we're doing here is building a community. We're not trying to tear one apart. However, I will say this. You know what? I love the content. I think the letters are great, and I think they're thoughtful and they're interesting. And I'd like to think that we're one of the only places where we're having this kind of conversation. And that's, that's kind of my whole, I don't know, my whole raison d'etre. Why I look, I don't speak French, but so it's probably, that's raison is as close as I get to French pronunciation. Elizabeth could correct me, but raison d'etre, that's the whole reason that I'm doing this, is to build a community. And I don't want it to become acrimonious, especially in the letter writing. Especially not to, I look at it this way. If anybody takes the time to write a lengthy and thoughtful letter, whether you disagree with it or not, I think that, assuming it's not, something that really offends me personally, I think it's worth sharing. And that's what I think this community is good at. And that's why I'm thankful to have Terry back from his Grail quest. I had to have our D'Artagnan back to jump into the fray of moderating, because I think that's what is good about what we're doing here. So anyway, I do not want to dissuade anyone from writing letters. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. This next one comes from Dan Vakura, another good letter writer. And again, responding to the issues at hand. Hey, Rob, this recent talk of diversity and representation in film has caused me to write this. It is lengthy, so I apologize for that. What I'm about to say will be controversial, but it's not any less true as far as I'm concerned. The truth that most movie pundits don't actually care about promoting representation. The truth is that most movie pundits don't actually care about promoting representation in film. It only occurs for superhero films with Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel, and Black Panther, and on rare occasions where there will be a film like Crazy Rich Asians that people will get behind. Star Wars could be included too with recent films. Crazy Rich Asians was a very generic romantic comedy to me, compared to a movie like The Big Sick, which had better acting along with a better story. Being based off a true story helped, and it was very successful, but it did not get nearly the same publicity as Crazy Rich Asians. It is very disingenuous to me when that happens, where most films that have representation get ignored, since they're not deemed important enough by outlets, even if they're well received. Rallying around blockbusters is always a bit strange to me, since they don't need to have the extra publicity, while ignoring many other movies that come out with a diverse range of thought and content, and not only race. There have been two films that went into more theaters within the last week, which are The Farewell and Blinded by the Light. Both are critically acclaimed by critics. The Farewell was written and directed by a Chinese woman who based it off of her own experience and is subsequently about a Chinese family. Blinded by the Light was directed by an Indian woman who is from England, and it is a coming-of-age story about a British Pakistani teenager whose life changes when he listens to Bruce Springsteen music. It was inspired by a real-life person. I saw both of them in the last 2 days and was the only person under the age of 65 in the theater for both. I wish I was exaggerating. No one is bothering to talk about them while being in theaters right now. Booksmart obviously wasn't a big success either earlier this year. Fast Color came out and is the best female-led superhero movie this year in my estimation, which also stars a black woman. No one has even mentioned it existing. I have. I showed you the Blu-ray on the show, where it had struggled to get a distributor and then went to VOD. I'm guessing most people have never heard of that movie. The Peanut Butter Falcon goes wide next week and stars a man who has Down syndrome, where he plays a character who is attempting to become a pro wrestler, while Shia LaBeouf and Dakota Johnson also star in it. It has also been very well received by critics, but once again, no one is bothering to talk about it in the movie pundit space. Many movies don't get discussed for having representation, while also being really good movies. Last year, Love, Simon was the first gay teen romance film put out by a major studio, which was Fox. It ended up being very profitable, but wasn't important enough to be discussed even with Black Panther out for a month at that point. If Beale Street Could Talk didn't get a Best Picture nomination, which genuinely surprised me with Barry Jenkins as the director, where I consider it better than Moonlight. It is about a young black woman trying to clear her boyfriend's name of a crime before the birth of their child. Blind Spotting is about a black man with 3 days of parole left, where he witnesses a police shooting that changes his relationship with his best friend. The Hate U Give also failed at the box office, with a black teenage girl as the lead. Hearts Beat Loud starred Nick Offerman of Parks and Rec fame, where his daughter is played by Kiersey Clemons, who is most famous for the movie Dope. A subplot in Hearts Beat Loud is a lesbian relationship with the daughter. You wouldn't know that from the trailer, since it wasn't trying to sell the movie on that relationship, but it's really well done. Dope was a great movie and also failed at the box office in 2015. I love Dope. I own Dope. I wasn't a big fan of Annihilation. I own Dope, the movie, to be clear. I wasn't a big fan of Annihilation, but it was led by 4 women who were portrayed as independent and smart. Shazam was more diverse than Captain Marvel this year, but wasn't talked about in that way compared to Captain Marvel, which was treated like a revolutionary movie. Wasp as a co-lead in Ant-Man and the Wasp was ignored completely when the marketing started for Captain Marvel. No one is propping up Terminator Dark Fate right now, even with being led by a woman, including one from Colombia. The trailer wasn't that good, but you would think people might attempt to rally around it. The list goes on and on. Obviously, not every movie will have a big studio behind it like Disney, Warner Brothers, or Fox when it comes to marketing, and the movies I've mentioned don't get the clicks and views. Most indie movies don't make that much money, and the general audience won't support them in droves. It would get expensive if you have a family and people won't support something that doesn't appeal to them. However, pundits ignore so many movies while praising certain blockbusters for their diversity, which is disingenuous, as I've said before. It doesn't make the blockbusters less important, but I do find it hypocritical. I'm not in any way saying that representation isn't a problem in Hollywood, but I wish that it was more accurately discussed by people who are part of the industry. I simply don't see that happen far too often, and I wish it would change. Dan Vakura. Dan, a fantastic letter. I agree with everything that you said. And I'll go right out it, and I'll say this. You know, I was the critic at large for Sci-Fi Universe magazine back in the 90s. I think my writing was marginal, could have been better, but I did take it very seriously. And I guess I would be a movie pundit. You'd call me a movie pundit for the last 4 years on YouTube, first on Collider Heroes, then on The Weekly Hero with John Campea, and now on the John Campea Show, where I talk about the industry, and on this show. And the movie space has been something I've been studying since I was a little kid. And I can honestly say that most of the people that are on YouTube as movie pundits do not know that much about movies. They know about a certain kind of movie, and they've been watching, for the most part, basically mainstream films. Now, that isn't true of everybody. That isn't true of everybody. But, you know, there are not a lot of people that I can have discussions about Antonioni's Ennui trilogy with. There's not a lot of the Apu trilogy. Saji Ray, who's he? You know, there's unless you went to film school, we live in a world, especially when I was growing up, there was much more. You would go to see foreign movies. When I grew up in Seattle, we had a very vibrant movie-going culture. The Seattle International Film Festival brought movies from all over the world, especially Pacific Rim movies. I was able to meet foreign directors. I met Fons Rodemaker, the director of The Assault, because it was a Dutch film. And I mean, I got to meet lots of people from all over the world. And growing up, I watched a lot more foreign cinema. I would go to the theater because I'd heard about them. I'd go to the landmark cinemas and see things that I hadn't been exposed to. I'd see a lot of foreign films, certainly at the Seattle Film Festival every year. And I think the problem is most of the film pundits, and I have a reason too, most of the film pundits that you listen to on YouTube grew up in the home video age. They came of age during the home video age. And that meant most of the films that people were watching were blockbuster movies. I worked in home video. I worked in video stores from 1980 to 1988. And there was a lot of more obscure films that were coming out on tape because it was hard. The studios didn't want to release their movies on tape at that time. Home video was thought to be the bane of the existence of Hollywood. Steven Spielberg famously once said to see the blood and sweat he poured into Close Encounters be reduced to a cassette that could fit in the palm of someone's hand was more than a little disconcerting. But I think the mainstream movie punditry that goes on is exactly that. It's mainstream. You know, even horror fans. I have a few friends. I have horror fans that I know, die-hard horror fans. You talk to them about Hammer horror, they can't watch it. They're like, I tried, I can't watch all that stuff. To me, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and maybe Black Christmas is the beginning of horror for most modern horror film fans, and I understand that. If you've grown up with a certain, it's like I'm always saying, if you grew up in a world where Jurassic Park already existed, it's really difficult to go back and watch Valley of the Gwangi or watch other dinosaur films. It's really hard because stop motion dinosaurs do not capture the imagination the way the dinosaurs, the beautiful CG creations and the physical creations of Stan Winston's studio did for Jurassic Park. And many of the movie pundits are also younger than I am. So they grew up in what I would call the blockbuster world, where all of the studios were releasing classic films horror movies, all of these things were from a certain era, a modern era. And when you grew up on a steady diet of those kinds of movies, and most people became movie fans because of mainstream cinema. So I don't necessarily think it's a critique of movie punditry in the sense that it is a reflection. The way people talk about movies is based in a very mainstream sensibility. And there's not a lot of people that have branched out. I'm not saying that's true of everybody. I think a lot of people have, but I'm constantly amazed at how people, I love reading when I just watched such and such for the first time. I mean, I'm always going on and on and on about movies like Sunset Boulevard and All About Eve. And I think the reason is, you know, movies have changed. I was talking with Mike Bodden, our moderator, Mike Bodden, about this, and how when movies first began, there was very much a tradition of theater and vaudeville. And that's when when we first had sound come in the late 20s and the early 30s, what we were getting, the kinds of movies we were getting were very informed by other, whether it was plays and comedy of the time, and movies have changed. I think the greatest period of shifting in terms of movies was the 70s. And you go back and you watch the movies of the 70s, the grittiness of them and the reality, the verisimilitude of 70s movies where my film education really began. Having grown up as a child in the 70s, I was a little young, and I was right there. I was seeing as many movies as I could. I couldn't go to all these R-rated movies. I had to beg and plead. But at the dawn of the video eras, that's when I would watch anything that came out. And there weren't a lot of movies on videotape. And a lot of the movies that did come out, there were some really strange and obscure movies because they were able to get the rights. Smaller companies could get the rights and put them out on tape. But I do think, and I think it's, by the way, it's across the board. I think that people they're not as well read as we were, say, 30 or 40 years ago. We're not reading the classics. I mean, there was sort of a baseline, especially with American education. I can only speak really to America, but I think American education has gone more mainstream, and there's less emphasis on reading the classics, and I think that's problematic. I think our tastes have gone very mainstream, which means that we're not thinking as critically or as deeply as we used to. But that could be because I'm old and I'm screaming, get off my lawn. You guys will have to tell me if I'm right about that or if I'm completely talking out of my ass, which is very possible I'm doing. But you never know. Anyway, again, beautifully written letter, really well-stated points, and very compelling. I wonder what you guys think of these letters, because I think they're pretty damn good. And I love getting these kinds of letters because I feel like, hey, we're doing something we're making a difference. You never know. Malbrained is here. Malbrained says, hail the literature of ideas. Arrival is the greatest sci-fi film of our time. Denis' Blade Runner was disappointing, though. Will Dune satisfy? That's interesting. Malbrained is now reviewing the output of Denis Villeneuve, who's one of, I think, our greatest filmmakers, and what will be his science fiction triptych. Unless you consider one of his early films. What is it? Enemy? Is that sci-fi? Vaguely. But Arrival, I love Arrival. I think Arrival is great, but they changed the original ending, which bothered me. In the original ending of the film, the gift was the language. And the gift was not the language. The gift was the technology that was going to allow in the original script, the reason that the visitors who could see, if you guys haven't seen Arrival, you should see Arrival. It's a wonderful movie. It's a great science fiction film, clearly one of the best of the modern age, but I'm going to spoil the ending. In the original script, the visitors who could see their language and the way they understand the universe through their language makes them able to see time, all time. And they knew that in 3,000 years, I think it was 3,000 years, that humanity was going to save them. But in order for humanity to save them, humanity needed the technology to get onto the technological path that could make them a spacefaring race, make us a spacefaring race 3,000 years in the future, so we could rescue the creatures of the Arrival when they needed to be rescued. So when they came to Earth, as they do in the movie, the whole point was ultimately they needed all of humanity to cooperate together to understand their language. And once they did that, everybody was given the piece of the technology they would need to become a spacefaring race, whether it was an engine or whatever. That's how the original script ended. What The Arrival did, and I am sure it came as a studio note. And whether it was better or worse, it became, the whole ending of Arrival became much more personal to Amy Adams. And the gift was the language itself, if anybody could ever like understand it. But Amy Adams turns out to be one of the only people who can. She writes the book. And I get it, because the whole story became about her personally. And in a way, what the change in The Arrival did in the script was it was sort of what Michael Piller did with Star Trek, The Next Generation, in the 3rd season. He said, look, no longer, we're still going to have external threats and problems, but they have to be addressed through one of our crew members, one of our main cast. How does our main cast relate to whatever is the problem? Has to start with a cast member. And that was what made Next Generation, I think, better. I think Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner is an incredible accomplishment, Malbrain. I can't agree with you there. I think it's one of the best sequels ever made. And I look, this might be an unpopular opinion. I think Blade Runner is a staggering science fiction achievement. It is a vision unlike we've ever seen. I don't think it's a particularly good movie. I think it's an incredible vision, but as a story, as a film, it's pretty threadbare, really. But the impact, what that movie's ultimately about, this idea that it's all about mortality. We all want life. You know, do replicants have spirits? Well, yes, they do. Just because human life might be artificially created, is it any less real? Not to the person who's alive, it isn't. And I think this is going to be an issue that we're going to grapple with for a long time. And Blade Runner, anybody who's touched by Blade Runner, and I find the movie touching from the opening scene, the vision is so staggering. But when you get to Roy Batty's final words, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. That's true of everybody. Everybody has seen something that the rest of us haven't seen at some moment in time. Maybe it was an interaction with a pet. Maybe it was their first kiss, whatever it was. All people are Roy Batty, and at one point or another, we're all going to be dying. You know, I want more life father, or I want more life fucker, depending on which version of the movie you watch. So I think Blade Runner is a pretty staggering achievement, but I do think Blade Runner 2049 is equally staggering. But that's just me. I didn't think it was disappointing at all. As a matter of fact, I couldn't believe how good it was. It really is amazing. That's why I'm so excited about Dune, because Dune is Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, even though it was a sequel, but they were based on original material. Dune is an adaptation of one of the greatest science fiction novels ever written. And if he sticks that landing, if he does and makes it what it could be, with his kind of intellect and that kind of filmmaking, I think we're going to get one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. Not that I'm setting myself up to be bummed out, which could very well be bummed out. JB Bonifacio says, I'll take a YouTube biopic tomorrow, please. I'd love to see a YouTube biopic. I remember for Australian television, somebody made an INXS biopic that I thought was pretty good. I love musical biopics. Speaking of that, when is somebody going to release Pink Floyd The Wall in HD? Huh? Criterion? Anybody? Why can't I get Pink Floyd The Wall? It's one of those DVDs that's really bothering me. I want to get rid of it, but I can't until I get the Blu-ray. Why? Somebody put it out. Put it out in 4K. I know it's just an aside. Anyway, I got... I know you guys are like, what about Willow's letter? What about Willow's letter? What's up with Willow's letter? Well, people, you just have to wait. I have another letter from Franz M. Franz M. And I hope everybody. This is interesting because I wanted to read this along with the Superman letter, because Franz M. is addressing some of the topics that we just heard about. This comes from Franz M. Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice is a misnomer. It's not about one hero fighting another. It's not about the Dark Knight trying to pummel the Man of Steel. No, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice is a movie at war with itself, and it loses. Zack Snyder clearly wants to make great films, and he means for Batman v Superman to be about something, to make some commentary about courage in a cynical world or whatever. But, like any superhero movie, it can be boiled down to honesty and courage equals good. So the ponderous shots of billowing capes and bullet casings falling in slow motion aren't cinematic Phillips, they're weight around its neck. This is where Batman v Superman falls apart. By succumbing to its try-hard tendencies, it loses all spontaneity. There are moments of joy, but they are far too few. Of its 151-minute running time, about 23 are truly enjoyable. In other words, 1 in 6 moments here is worth watching. With odds like that, it's a bad bet no matter who's fighting. Rating 2 out of 5 alcohol required. A common claim on numerous film forums, podcasts, news comment sections, and especially YouTube videos is the assertion that evaluations of film quality are subjective. I think this philosophy is bullshit. Advocating that art and art criticism are based purely on individual knee-jerk reactions of creativity and interpretations of such creativity respectfully devalues the art and all who work to understand it. Claiming that film content and cinematic quality are subjective is the lamest, laziest, most cop-out answer one can make in film criticism. Similar to how people of faith propose to explain away the existence of a higher power by saying, God works in mysterious ways, allegations of film subjectivity are worse than a bad or nonsensical argument against or for a particular film. It is not even an argument. It's a non-answer. A half-hearted, throw your hands up in the air straw man defense for people too lazy or ignorant to defend their position. While no filmmaker or film academic is entirely free from biased perception of the world around them, some are clearly more free than others and are better able to disassociate their personal views and experiences from limiting their understanding of other people and their artistic expression. For that is what a true review is. An assessment of a film that is as free as possible from personal biases, which is backed by rational arguments, concrete examples, i.e. evidence of quality, and detailed explanation. A good reviewer does not only tell you whether a movie sucks or not, they explain why, and in detail. There are oceans of difference in splitting hairs and disparate quality. It may be futile to determine whether a cinematic landmark like Citizen Kane is really better or worse than an American classic like The Godfather, but much, much larger contrasts in cinematic craft exist in excess and speak to the very real nature of objective cinematic quality. For instance, compare either of the former to anything Adam Sandler has ever done, or any blockbuster from Transformers: Age of Extinction. My assertion that Fight Club is a better piece of cinematic art than Transformers isn't my opinion, it's a fucking fact. In other words, while it may be impossible to prove with 100% certainty the precise cinematic quality of all films relative to each other, that doesn't mean cinematic quality doesn't exist, or that it isn't objectively measurable in some way based on the craftsmanship in the art of filmmaking, independent of our own personal positive or negative evaluations of a film, like I liked it or I hated it. Alleging that cinematic quality and craftsmanship are subjective is akin to giving everyone gold stars for trying in Little League Soccer or an A for effort in academia. This bullshit philosophy only devalues the entire craft of not only film itself, but film criticism as well, because it argues that there is actually no craft in either of them. Many things in life are up for debate. Many things can be interpreted and argued over. Everyone is different. Everyone is a product of their own environment, dictated to by their personal tastes. Things like our favorite foods, favorite actors, favorite sports, books, music, and yes, films are all a personal matter. What each one of us loves is indeed subjective. What is not subjective, however, is quality. Quality is very much objective, and film is either good or it is not. Someone could love Batman v Superman. Their dream may have been to see their two favorite superheroes battle it out on the screen. They may have enjoyed its bombastic nature and the spectacle of action on display, all of the nods, winks, and nudges toward their favorite mythology. But that person would also have to admit that the film is not The Shawshank Redemption. They would have to admit that the story was overly obtuse, the CGI was poorly done, the characters were thinly drawn, the plot lacked substance, and the direction was messy. These things are all true. Batman v Superman is not a good film, but that doesn't mean you can't like it. That comes from Franz M. And I would say, Franz, bravo. I really like that letter. I've often talked about the fact that I don't believe that art is entirely subjective, nor do I believe that films are entirely subjective, because a person's opinion about whether a movie is good or bad does not necessarily speak to the quality of the film. And I've often thought craft does play a part. There is certain things about quality that are objective. And I think that's true of cinema. There's a lot of people today, especially, that would watch Citizen Kane and go, you know, that is not the best movie ever made. And I would say that maybe that's true for them. But when you look at the time it was made, you look at the quality, the storytelling, I personally think that Citizen Kane is one of the most wildly entertaining movies I've ever seen, because it pulls every cinematic trick in the book out. And it's astonishing to me. It's a first-time feature, and the fact that it was so topical at the time and what it was really trying to do, it's an astonishing, staggering artistic achievement. And look, there's people that would watch Citizen Kane and go, I didn't really like it. I wasn't into it. Simply because they're not into the subject matter. They won't watch a movie that's black and white. But again, that doesn't have any bearing on whether the movie itself is really good or bad. So I think people's opinions, people's ideas about how a movie affects them or what they think of a movie, their subjectivity is fine. But I think when you're really reviewing film, there is an understanding. You have to understand, you have to say that, okay, the craft involved in making this film elevates it beyond certain other films. I've always believed that. I mean, I always think that you got to take into consideration when you're watching something that's beautifully made by somebody who really understands how cinema works, you're getting something special, or you're getting something that's better, and that has to be taken into consideration. But, you know, that doesn't mean anybody has to like it. Anyway, like this letter. So Franz, even though you got hammered in the first letter today, and I apologize for that, I thought it was worth doing. But I didn't just read your letter as a follow-up to make you feel better. I don't do that. I thought this was a really good letter. And I really liked how you stated it. So it's good. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. So thank you for that. Let's see what anybody else has to say. Wow, there's a lot of you. Willow Yang says, have you seen The Farewell? I had the exact same debate with my parents over how Chinese people deal with terminal illness in the family. I have not seen The Farewell, but I really want to see it. I mean, it's hard for me. You know, I'm so busy doing various things. It's hard for me to get out to the theater, but I always pick these things up later. I mean, I hate to say it. I want to see every movie in the theater when I can. It's just hard to get to the theater. But I really want to see The Farewell. And I heard the director on an interview on NPR, and I really like what Awkwafina has been doing with her career, and I really want to see the film. I love that idea. Plus, I love the fact that it's a real examination of the loss, of how people deal with loss and dying in Asian culture. So I haven't seen it yet, Willow. I'd be curious to hear what you think. Anthony Gonzalez says Ex Machina is also one of the best modern science fiction films. Well, Anthony, I would agree with you wholeheartedly. If you guys haven't seen, anybody who's here, if you haven't seen Alex Garland's Ex Machina, it's really interesting. There's a whole subgenre of science fiction film that, I mean, it's probably even earlier, but I really noticed it in Fritz Lang's 1927 Metropolis, when, of course, the robotrix, you know, Maria, comes to life. I mean, it's this idea that machines can have souls, or when a machine becomes self-aware, AI, all of these things. And we've been obsessed with this idea for a long time. Colossus, the Forbin Project, 1970. You know, the idea of Skynet becoming sentient, deciding to wipe out all the life on Earth. Star Trek Discovery Season 2. I mean, there's this constant examination of the idea. Blade Runner, Battlestar Galactica, all of these things. And Ex Machina, I thought, was a terrific film, a fantastic science fiction film that isn't just about an AI becoming self-aware. It's also about the morality of how we as human beings are going to treat this emergent, what could be an underclass. Are we going to look, The Measure of a Man, one of the greatest episodes of Next Generation, from the second season of Next Generation, especially the extended version that's on the Blu-ray. Thank you very much. I was instrumental in making that happen. The Measure of a Man from the second season is a phenomenal episode of Star Trek dealing with what happens when we can create a slave race of AIs or sentient androids. What are we going to do? So yes, I think Ex Machina, and to me, it's great because Ex Machina is very apocalyptic. I really like Ex Machina a lot. And it also shows that we as human beings, as we progressed in technology, I mean, they're making chimeras now. They're crossing human DNA with animal DNA to create weird chimeras. And what's going to happen there? Where are our bioethics? Do we have any? I don't know. But yes, I love Ex Machina, Anthony. Alexander Wilson is here. Thank you for the support, sir. Alexander Wilson says, theaters have a big part in people not going to see small movies because it's too expensive. I live in DC and you will spend big money to see a movie on a Friday night. People think small movies are sometimes not worth the price. Yes, sir, you nailed it. I am a huge proponent of tiered pricing. A movie like The Farewell, or also Blinded by the Light, these movies should be far less expensive. When you go to a movie theater, I mean, these films are getting lost in the shuffle. No one's going. If they knew that these wonderful movies that are getting, you know how hard it is to get a theatrical release? So when a movie like The Farewell gets one and a movie like Blinded by the Lights gets one and nobody goes, it's heartbreaking. No more so to the filmmakers and also the indie distributors who are putting these movies out. If we had tiered pricing at movie theaters, which I'm a huge advocate of, a lot of people would go to these movies. Look, in Disneyland, when I first went to Disneyland, they had different kinds of tickets based on the kind of ride you went on. If you're a fan of the mid-'80s horror sci-fi, I wouldn't call it a parody, but a humorous horror sci-fi film called Night of the Comet. There's a scene when one of, I guess you'd call them zombies, but one of them says, well, an e-ticket attraction. This idea is going to be lost amongst many people, but Disneyland used to have books of tickets, and the tickets were the letters of the alphabet. I think it was A through E, and E was the top tier. So if you wanted to go on Pirates of the Caribbean or the Haunted Mansion, or I think the Matterhorn, the biggest rides, the best rides were E-ticket attractions. So there you go. If you watch Night of the Comet and you never understood what that guy said, now you know that's what an E-ticket attraction was. I absolutely think with theaters having their like the A-list, what AMC has done with their A-list cards, their memberships, we should absolutely have lower tiered pricing. And if people knew that, if people knew they could have a great night out at the movies and they know their admission is going to be half of what they would spend on, say, Avengers Endgame, which is a movie that costs, what, $350 million to produce. And I think, again, it becomes a cultural thing. If we knew that there was all of these vibrant, like we could have a push, get people to come see the magic of the movies that you've never seen before and get people to come and make independent movies vibrant again. I think that would be great. Everybody waits to see a movie like The Farewell. Even I. The Farewell or Blinded by the Light, two movies I really want to see. Get families to come back because those are movies families would enjoy too. The irony is that families don't have to just go see a bunch of spectacular entertainment. They can actually see movies of weight and substance and go out to dinner afterwards and talk about what they've seen. I think it's a great idea, Alexander. Alexander Wilson says Kit Harington is joining the MCU according to Deadline. Who do you think he will play? Will it be in the movies or Disney Plus? I would assume he's going to be one of the Eternals. I don't know, but I would assume so. Maybe. Only because that's their next film, and they're going to be casting that up. I could see Kit Harington. I got to tell you, Kit Harington was actually in one of my favorite TV shows in England. It was called Spooks. They couldn't call that here. They couldn't call it in America, so they retitled the show to MI5. But Kit Harington, they actually, after 10 seasons, they actually made a Spooks movie in England, and it got released only on video here because not many people know the show, but it was released here as MI5. And I thought Kit Harington was great in the movie, just like I thought that, Richard Madden was great in Bodyguard. So I would imagine Kit Harington I don't know who he is going to be in the Eternals, but I would imagine he would be in the Eternals. We'll see. That could be very interesting. Stubble McShave says, I saw The Longest Day. The long crane shot in the harbor is an amazing achievement with all men and explosions, since there's no CGI in the 2-minute sequence. I know, man. It's amazing when you go back and you watch these classic films, what you're getting. I mean, it's truly, truly, truly incredible. And again, Apocalypse Now, if it's still in the theaters, I don't know if it is. Maybe it was only for a week. It's coming out on 4K in a couple weeks. Actually, it's coming out on 4K next week. If you can get Apocalypse Now in the theater and get to it, it's amazing. Amazing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is right. I've got Willow Yang in the house, yo. What's going on? What is up? Hello, Willow. Got some Willow talk for you. By the way, a change of pace, not a Star Trek review, but something else that's also near and dear to my heart. For many of you, one of the great things that you can see on TV this year is HBO's Chernobyl. And by the way, the second season is being written in Russia right now with the explosion of their missile that ran on a nuclear reactor. I mean, season 2, I'm telling you, all kinds of mysterious things happening. But Willow has written in about Chernobyl. Greetings, Rob. I know that I'm very late to the party, but I would like to take a break from my Star Trek reviews to talk about Chernobyl. Not only is the series amazing, but it has resonated with me on a personal level with its reverence for science. I'm thoroughly impressed by how the show is able to so elegantly explain the underlying scientific principles behind the disaster in terms that the layman can understand. One of the key challenges that scientists have is being able to relay information effectively to the public. Chernobyl is able to achieve that and do it masterfully without the use of jargons, something that I often struggle with myself. If I have to nitpick, one minor detail that bothered me a bit is that the cast is comprised primarily of English actors, with the exception of the great Stellan Skarsgård, of course. I did find the disconnect between the Soviet Union setting and the accents of the characters to be initially slightly jarring. However, I don't know if the alternative of having everyone speak with stereotypical Russian or Ukrainian accents would have been better. It might have detracted from the story and how the emotions that show was conveying. The other small gripe that I have is that the show depicted radiation victims as being highly toxic and contagious. This is exemplified by the side plot involving the pregnant Ludmilla and her firefighter husband, Vasily. Even though the story does a phenomenal job of illustrating the horror and heartbreak of the victims of the disaster, realistically, I find it dubious that someone who is only externally exposed to radiation and whose clothing had already been removed would still possess enough contamination on their bodies to pose any significant danger to those around them. I do not know what actually happened in real life, but the show's dramatization of the events just seemed a little questionable. The real reason why people need to avoid being in close physical contact with radiation victims is that they have no immune system left and are highly susceptible to infections. What I particularly want to commend Chernobyl for is how provocative it is. The show is able to evoke so much emotion in me: anger, horror, disgust, frustration, and do it so effortlessly. Things happen in the series and people make decisions that were just maddening to watch. The superiors adamantly insisting that nothing was wrong, even as pieces of nuclear graphite were lying scattered everywhere. The civilians gathering on the bridge to watch the fire from the power plant, oblivious to the radioactive debris that were raining down upon them. The grossly negligent supervisors stubbornly proceeding on with the safety test against all common sense. The corrupt government forcibly suppressing the truth, enacting policy based on their own arbitrary whims rather than scientific facts, readily expending the lives of their own citizens to save face. There were times when I was infuriated and devastated by what was happening, times when I just wanted to shout at the screen. Chernobyl didn't just illustrate the corruption and the horror of the disaster, however. It also celebrated the triumph of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. From the firefighters to the divers to the hilarious miners to the countless military and civilian liquidators, the show honored the heroism of those who stepped up in the wake of tragedy. It depicted humanity both at its worst and at its finest. And at the heart of the story were the two scientists, Legasov and Khomyuk, I can't pronounce that word, Komiak, played phenomenally by Jared Harris and Emily Watson, respectively, and to fight to reveal the truth. Legasov delivers a haunting speech at the conclusion of the series. To be a scientist is to be naive. We are so focused on our search for truth, we fail to consider how few actually want us to find it. But it is always there, whether we want to see it or not, whether we choose to or not. The truth doesn't care about our needs or wants. It doesn't care about our governments, our ideologies, our religions. It will lie in wait for all time. And this, at least, is the gift of Chernobyl. Where I once would fear the cost of truth, now I only ask, what is the cost of lies? His words shook me. I think about our ongoing mess with the anti-vaccine movement and the measles outbreaks, all stemmed because of a fraudulent paper published by a corrupt doctor who was being financed by lawyers that were working on an anti-vaccine lawsuit and who conveniently failed to disclose this conflict of interest to the editors. What is the cost of his lies? How many lives have been harmed because of this? How many hours and millions of dollars have been spent just to disprove his falsified data? Resources that could have otherwise gone to other researches. I think about our own Canadian government. It was only several years ago when our previous administration made efforts to muzzle its scientists, slashing funding to climate change research and restricting government scientists from being able to communicate their findings to the public. It is easy to dismiss what happened in Chernobyl as the result of a corrupt, repressive government, and yet we are still seeing this type of mentality in our own supposedly democratic countries. We shouldn't be debating over the scientific facts of anthropogenic climate change, anthropogenic climate change anymore. The real discussion we should be having is over what is to be done about it, whether we're willing to make sacrifices now to save the future of our planet. Chernobyl, for me, is a show that transcends entertainment. It is more than just a compelling expose. It is more than just superb writing and acting, masterful direction and cinematography. It is something that has managed to deeply touch and move me. It is something that has forced me to re-examine my own actions and outlook. It is something that has inspired me to always strive to be better. It is something that I believe has the ability to transform its viewers. And that, in my opinion, is the greatest power of cinema. Yours sincerely, Willow. I mean, what a fantastic letter. Once again, Willow knocking it out of the park as always. Once again, it just makes me want to sit down and get really drunk with her and just see what she has to say about various topics. But this is a fantastic letter. And again, it speaks to the power of cinema when cinema is really cooking. When you're seeing something that is firing on all cylinders, that's what you get. I felt exactly the same way about Chernobyl as Willow did. And not only, I see Chernobyl as a cautionary tale about, right now, the planet is the reactor. The planet is the exposed reactor that's burning up, that's going to go full-on China syndrome. And the reasons that nobody is doing anything about it is for the same reasons that the executives and the government functionaries were not doing anything about Chernobyl because it was too hard. They just would rather. It's very difficult when you can't see the actual results of something. Unless you walk into an irradiated zone, it's really difficult to think, oh, what is this ash that I'm standing on this bridge and it's falling all over me? You can't see it. And our planet, we're going to feel the effects, just like you see what happens to people that were exposed to what happened in Chernobyl. Radiation is devastating. And it's very interesting when we talk about people. I go onto Twitter. There was one guy, I think I blocked him today. All I had to do was mention climate change. I'm sure he's a Russian bot, but I'd mention climate change and he would come back with all of these. Everybody that wants to talk about climate change and says, oh, the climate science is not settled and man-made climate change is not, we don't know if that's true or not. They never sit there and go, on the other hand, well, why don't we stop spewing particulate matter out into the closed biosphere of our planet? Why don't we figure out a way to get the Pacific Gyre and get rid of all the plastics that are out of the ocean? Why don't we not pollute our groundwater? Because, people got to work. So the byproducts of fracking and, they'd rather, I understand in the short term, people got to eat, people got to get paid. But in the long term, we only have one biosphere. And the fact that over the last 150 years, the industrialization that has occurred has seriously, if you don't think that man and belching out particulate matter into our air supply is at all damaging. Like, oh, there's no problem. All you have to do is close the frickin' vent in your, next time you have a fire, if you've got a fireplace, close the vent. Don't let the smoke come out. Don't let the smoke go up the chimney. Just let it fill up your house. I mean, every time we have a smokestack spewing, it's just we have more space, so we don't notice it as much. I mean, it's just silly to me. Chernobyl spoke to me exactly the way it spoke to you, Willow. Again, your letters are spot on and beautifully written. So yes, my God, it's Chernobyl, like all great drama or all great. I mean, in a way, it's not really science fiction; it's historical epic. But the old adage, those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat history. I mean, Chernobyl works on so many different levels. You brought up anti-vaccination. I mean, vaccinations were working. The idea that people say that I don't understand why the spikes in autism aren't environmental factors there. Of course they are. I mean, I can't prove that. I'm not a scientist, but I would just assume that just our food and what we're putting in our bodies obviously has had a significant, over the last 100 years, a significant detriment to people. I mean, this is common sense, but you never know. Craziness. But what a great letter. Once again, Willow, thank you for sending me such a lovely and compelling letter. Great stuff there. Love it. See, today, man, I'm telling you, the last couple of days, the show's been on fire, if I do say so myself. But why? It's on fire because of you guys. Alexander Wilson says, I loved Chernobyl, but I think When They See Us will win a lot of awards over it because I think the racist, wrongful convictions are more relevant today, especially when you look at Kamala Harris. Well, Alex, that is what Alexander Wilson is talking about is Ava DuVernay's miniseries about the Central Park Five, who were wrongfully accused of raping a woman who was on a nightly jog, and it has a very powerful message that I think you're right, Alexander Wilson. I think, Alexander, it definitely deals with hot button issues of race and things that are continuing to go on now in America. Again, it works like Chernobyl. It's about a historical event, and it still speaks to today. I think both. Look, I don't think it's hard. Like when you talk about when you pit When They See Us against Chernobyl in the awards space, I think you're doing a disservice to the power of both shows. You're trying to pick one over another. They're so very different, but they are so topical and vital, and they are so necessary. And I would say, I mean, both of those shows can be shown in school, and you would have a lot. You'd be able to get a lot of discussion going. I think a lot of people have a lot they can learn from both shows. And again, it's all about the same thing. You know, how our system, people don't want to deal with truth. They don't want to deal. What is the actual truth? It's easier. Anybody needs a quick conviction. Sure, a white woman gets raped in Central Park, and we need that quick conviction. Let's find 5 black dudes and pin it on them. And I think that kind of thing goes on all day, every day, still. And that's why it's an important show to watch. Plus, it's also, again, beautifully made. We're getting such great stuff. I mean, Chernobyl being on HBO, and then When They See Us is on Netflix. We're just getting some incredible television, and we're living truly through a golden age. And yeah, great stuff. This is an older. I'm dipping back into some older letters, but there's some older letters, and I think this letter I really like this letter a lot. And if I haven't read your letters, look, I can't read everybody's letters. It's getting to the point where we're getting a lot of letters. So I want to pick the best of the best. And there's some letters, though, that have been in my backlog that I just haven't read. And I'm trying to go through those and slowly catch up. But this letter comes from Ken Dixon, and I had to read it. Dear Rob, I find myself questioning my fandom and the influence of competing franchises. I'll use my newfound addiction for hot toys as a yardstick. In May, I told you I'd purchased my first hot toy, the Iron Man Mark IV with the suit-up gantry. Since then, I've also ordered the Mark 35, or Mark 85, Thor from Infinity War, Stan Lee from Guardians 2, and at the conclusion of your 200th episode, I found myself purchasing Captain America from Endgame. You really should get some form of commission from Sideshow. Anyway, as you know, these are not inexpensive fan collectibles. I have bought many cool collectibles in my life, but never at this level. I've been a lifelong Star Wars and Batman fan, yet I have not been compelled to buy Sideshow or Hot Toys items in either category. I was always a DC guy as a kid, but with the MCU, I've been fully immersed in Marvel fandom. This really speaks to the accomplishment of Kevin Feige and all the talents that Marvel Studios has leveraged for their incredible film franchises. I will always love Star Wars and Batman, but I approach those worlds with a level of skepticism given the way the franchises have been mishandled. I don't expect Warner Brothers or Lucasfilm to copy Marvel Studios, but there should be some key components to how Marvel handles its stewardship of their movies that can apply to these other beloved characters. For God's sake, Lucasfilm is Marvel's step-sibling, for crying out loud. What do you think of using collectible purchases as a yardstick for fandom? How much of an influence do those sales have on these companies? I know you've been a great defender of Kathleen Kennedy, but what would you do if you were the Kevin Feige of Lucasfilm or DC? You're the best, Rob. Cheers, Ken. P.S. I recently enjoyed opening a bottle of Jameson 18-year-old. It was delicious. I'll raise a glass to you. Well, Ken, another great letter. I love this letter. It's really funny. It's funny. I'll tell you. I think what you're fans of as you get older, it ebbs and it flows. And what we as fans, why do we collect toys? I've always liked action figures because they're sort of an externalization, obviously, of what's going on in my own mind, but they're also reminders. They're sort of tokens of not just the character, but of the writers who wrote the characters, the directors who brought the films to life, the costume designers who made those incredible costumes, the actors that inhabited those roles. And for me, a reminder of great storytelling overall. And I've always loved characters. I've always loved action figures since I was a kid. And I do think Hot Toys has developed into the best action figure line. Of course, they are hideously expensive and they are impractical to collect because they are so expensive. But, and because they're so expensive, you have to pick those characters. Like I have to say, behind me, my characters are not displayed. My Hot Toys figures are not ideally displayed. I got to turn on the lights. I got to fix the electrical systems in these display cases. I had a display case in my old office. It was a huge display case that I loved, where I had a lot of my characters set up. I had all the Avengers spread out on a shelf, and it was really, really cool. And, it's a way to get in touch with your inner child. And I loved it. Every time I came into my office in the morning, I turned on the lights in the case. I also had a Batman underneath the Avengers. I had the DC shelf, and I had a lot of the Nolan Batman stuff. Like I had Batman, of course, and I had Heath Ledger's Joker, and I had Two-Face, and I had, you can see, I still have up here Catwoman on the Bat Pod, and it made me really happy when I would open up. I like to watch people's videos online, YouTube videos of their collections, and I love to see people who have places like a big room. Like I would love to have a room where I can just put all my toys up and display them. This is kind of an antechamber in our house between one end of the house and the other end of the house. It's basically the laundry room. I'm in the laundry room. I don't have my own room in this house. and the Imaginarium, which is in the garage, maybe I'll move into there because it's an explosion of everything. But I don't have a place to put my action figures, really. But I do think it's important if you want to collect things. Ultimately, you can't take it with you. And you could say that collecting these things is kind of stupid in the long run, but they do give me joy. For instance, I had bought a lot of flying model rockets about 10 years ago. I went on a flying model rocket jag when I found out that they made what they called upscale versions. So I bought like 20 from various companies. I didn't make them. I didn't build them. And a couple of years ago, I was telling Elizabeth about them, and she's like, "You should bring one over and build one." And I hadn't. I mean, I've been carrying around these unbuilt model rockets for 10 years, and I started building them. I've got a few right over here, and they're cool. I really enjoyed building them again, and I like my rockets. I don't think I'm going to buy any more. You know, I basically was able to get the upscale version of the Interceptor E that I put that, but it really depends. Like if you're not into Batman now, I will say the Hot Toys Batman figures are great. The 2-packs, the Alfred, Bruce Wayne, and Batman Armory. It's pretty dope, if I do say so myself. It's pretty great. So there's a lot of great Batman Hot Toys, and of course the Christopher Reeve Superman Hot Toy. But you got to collect what you got to collect. And it got to the point where it used to be possible where you could collect everything. Like you could get every Star Wars figure. And I stopped collecting 3 3/4-inch figures. I only started collecting 12-inch. So when they brought back the Star Wars 12-inch figures in the late 90s, I started collecting them. And then I sort of let it fall by the wayside. But then Sideshow took over, and I started collecting Sideshow 12-inch figures, Star Wars figures. And then Hot Toys took it over. So I've still got, I buy new Star Wars Hot Toys. But I'll tell you something. I haven't bought any Hot Toys from the new movies. It's not that they're not cool figures; they are, but I just don't care. You know, I don't. The new characters are not. They don't appeal to me. I have no connection to them, and I haven't developed a connection with them over the movies. I haven't bought any of the older original series characters, but from the Force Awakens, but I would. You know, but it really depends. It depends what you like. If they put out a crazy figure, like for instance, there's a lot of second aftermarket from third-party distributors, even bootleg characters of figures that I would collect that haven't been licensed, that I'll pick up if they're any good. So, yeah, I mean, you got to collect things that make you happy. And if collecting becomes a problem, you shouldn't do it. Yeah, but there's a lot of great stuff out there. And I just love the fact that we live in a world where I can get a Stan Lee from Guardians of the Galaxy 2, where he's literally sitting. I think it's great that they made that a figure of that character, and it's arrived at the warehouse in Hong Kong, so they're going to be shipping them out. So that means in a month or two they'll arrive stateside, and that's cool. But it is really interesting to see what I'll tell you. I'll use an example of like I love the X-Files. But after seasons 10 and 11, they were so disappointing to me that my love of the X-Files waned. And I had forgot that I had ordered the 3A. Was it 3A? They made the new X-Files figures. And I had ordered them from Big Bad Toy Store. And when they came in, they were putting what they do is if you go to Big Bad Toy Store, which I really love, and you pre-order something, they charge you for it, but they put it in your pile of loot. And then they will send it to you if you set up your account that way. And I forgot, and I did this twice. When the Fox Mulder came in, I refunded it. And when the Dana Scully came in recently, refunded it. I don't care about X-Files anymore. I never thought that a day would come when I wouldn't want to get like a 12-inch figure of Fox Mulder and Dana Scully. But because my X-Files fandom has waned, and I'll tell you something else, I was going to collect all the same company was making Game of Thrones 12-inch figures. And I really wanted to collect the Game of Thrones 12-inch figures. I have a Tyrion Lannister, but after the final season of Game of Thrones, because it didn't stick the landing, don't care. Although the Rasmus Toys Lord of the Rings figures, that their Super Gandalf figure with the rooted hair, amazing. So maybe I'll get back on the Lord of the Rings horse and start collecting those figures. I have some, but I stopped collecting those too. But because what you want is, like, in my mind, when you want to collect something, you want to have a pantheon, a group, so you can have a group shot. But I don't know, I'm off in the weeds here. But I thought that was a good letter. I loved your letter. So thank you for sending that letter in, like that letter. Now, this is another one. This comes from a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. As many of you know, many of you He-Man fans know, Netflix announced a Masters of the Universe series that is going to be spearheaded by Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith is going to take over the Masters of the Universe series. And Orlando Olivero, a.k.a. Pterodon Media, he is a longtime contributor here, wrote me a letter about this very thing. and he has very strong opinions about it. Dear Rob, moderators, and fellow members of the Post-Geek Singularity, it's been a while, quite some while, since I've written to you, and my Post-Geek Singularity brethren. I would like to blame the scorching heat of Central Texas, but truth be told, I realize that over the past month, you have received many, many letters that you must get to. So I've just been listening and enjoying for now, whilst trying to figure out ways to shorten the drafts that I had been meaning to send you. But there are a few that are meant to be for the site only. They're just too long. But today, my friend, I must speak up. This, I realize, may not be as near and dear to your heart as Star Trek, Star Wars, or other examples of genre media that you enjoy. However, I will say that it closely mirrors the sentiments of related fandoms, and there is a similar parallel to the recent handling of franchises we often discuss, this in the Post-Geek Singularity. So, it has recently been announced that Netflix will be bringing a new Masters of the Universe cartoon series serving as the sequel to the original Filmation show. The powers that be have decided that they would give this to none other than to nerd celeb Kevin Smith. So, Rob, here's what happened. I reacted. Oh boy, did I react. I went to social media and I exploded. This news came to me like a prison shiv to the kidney. I may have said a few things that may have correlated this to the handling of Star Trek Discovery. Well, yes, I did say those things, and there were a few people that came out swinging, defending both this and Star Trek Discovery. Now, my relationship to Kevin Smith is complex. No, it's not as simple as me disliking the guy. In fact, I've explained to others in social media that I do, in fact, like the original Clerks movie. And I liked Mallrats when it first came out. I also liked the Clerks animated series. Everything in between and after simply lost me. Perhaps it was the humor, the preachiness, the Ben Affleck, the dick and fart jokes. It's just not my thing, man. The characters all started seeming pretentious. It all started feeling like an inside joke while gaining a mass appeal. When it comes to humor, it's all about Monty Python, Cheech and Chong, Mr. Show, Kids in the Hall, Letterman, Red Dwarf, but not Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Again, I don't think I hate the guy. I would still listen to interviews and podcasts, but would often find myself cringing at his frequent attempts at comedy. Kevin Smith has also risen to popularity with his numerous appearances on shows, and people have, in a way, made him their go-to nerd lord. Yet many of these people can't tell you who Harlan Ellison was. So yeah, I said a few things that were emotionally driven, made a video on my channel like a big baby, and have been thinking about it ever since. Look at me, I'm still pouting. But, and there is a very big hairy but here, I think that there's a chance that a lowly peon like myself could be right about one or two things here. So not only am I a devotee of this franchise, let me also point out that over the past 35 years, I have literally invested thousands of dollars into Masters of the Universe. Yes, thousands. And I feel you. In fact, I recently ordered Super 7's Snake Mountain playset that is scheduled to arrive early next year. It is a massive $700 thing. Does it make me special? No. But perhaps I do know some stuff here and there about Masters of the Universe. I'll tell you what, it makes me think that you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. Not that I bought that. I don't even know what Snake Mountain is, but if Super 7 made it, I'm going to go online right now and check it out. Have I ever heard Kevin Smith make a reference or mutter one thing about this franchise in all of his years in the spotlight? Nope. Granted, I have not combed every single interview or podcast. That's not my job. That's for Midnight's Edge. I just think he may not be the right person for the job. I pointed out to some folks that this reminds me of J.J. Abrams with Star Trek, Michael Bay with Transformers, and Kurtzman with Star Trek, Transformers, Spider-Man 2, and goddamn Universal Monster Dark Universe. Taking a moment to breathe. I'm not saying that's the case. It just reminds me of it. I may also add, it just seems, that some people are forcing themselves to like shows like Star Trek Discovery just because other people hate it. And that's not right in my book. I think Star Trek Discovery is a whole other matter that involved plagiarism, lack of originality, inconsistency, arrogance, and cronyism. Good on you, sir. Going back to Masters of the Universe, look, I'm sure that there will be a product that people watch. There will be something that has some semblance of quality. I'm sure there are people that will like it, With anything that gets released, there's a basic formula or recipe for creating a successful show or movie. Wash, rinse, repeat. I'm genuinely happy for those that like both Kevin Smith's work and Masters of the Universe. On the other hand, I am sad and perhaps ashamed of myself in a way. I'm upset that this matter affects me so much. We're talking about muscle dudes with swords, warrior babes, and hooded skeleton sorcerers. Why is it so important? Why does it bother me? Why can't I like Kevin Smith's work? Why did I buy thousands of dollars of Masters of the Universe product? Someone may ask, well, do you think you can do any better? And I'd say, well, fucking maybe I'd botch the entire thing. But like you said, it's all about the money. The sanctity of a fictional world and its characters may not even matter. In this case, Mattel, Universal, Netflix, and Kevin Smith have made it clear that it is about the fiscal success of the property. There's a new toy line coming up. The retro stuff is hot. Kevin Smith is a household name. It all makes sense. Dollars and cents, I'm adding. Again, I don't want to hate the guy. In fact, I won't. I've noticed that the fan community is divided on this because the man is not liked by everyone. So let me make it clear that I do have respect for what he did, especially with Clerks and his first and failed animated venture. I also make an effort to avoid jumping on hate trains that other people jump on because it's a popular opinion. It's so easy to hate, but difficult to explain as to why. I'm pretty sure Kay Smith and I would get along. We'd probably get into a few fights, wrestle each other to the ground, and I'd whisper, "Oh, Kevin, what are we doing?" Jokes aside, I just think there was a potential to have more well-versed people to handle this with care that I feel it deserves. Let's be honest, where was everyone in the early 2000s with the Masters of the Universe reboot that aired on Cartoon Network? It was a magnificent series that didn't deserve to get canceled after 2 seasons. In fact, that series is still highly revered by actual fans. It had deep and meaningful plots, characters with depth, an expansive universe. Oh, I forgot. Retro 80s stuff wasn't cool again at that time. I suppose that's another problem. I notice when things get retro and hip again, the masses want to re-explore it for the moment, and the original fandom will often get neglected. Such was the case with Star Wars, Transformers, Star Trek, Ninja Turtles, and it goes on and on. Seriously, what's the formula for that? 20 years? Vague familiarity? Memes? Today, I found out a very prominent figure in the Masters of the Universe fan base announced that his 3-year-long animation project has been shut down by, you guessed it, Mattel. This project used some of the original cells from the Filmation series as he was attempting to create an HD, high-quality, fan-made Masters of the Universe episode. There was a lot of excitement surrounding this fan film, and many were supporting a fan project that was faithful to the series and involved folks that had a great deal of love for the property. Does that sound familiar to you? No, not at all. Well, Mattel finally decided that they weren't having that. They also decided that they would no longer continue the decade-long Masters of the Universe Classics line being handled by Super 7 because Mattel is pushing their own new product. That is reality, and that is business. We cannot deny that Kevin Smith is also reality and also business. So I think I may have answered my own question. If Mattel wants to create a series to promote a new toy line, if they want to sell it to new audiences, children and non-collectors that just have a nostalgic and vague recollection, if they want to appease at least a quarter of the loyal fan base of nearly 4 decades while developing a simple cartoon series with a popular household name behind it, then yes, Kevin Smith is probably the right guy for this. Hugs and kisses to all, Orlando Logan Olivero of Pterodon Media. P.S. My He-Man birthday parties kicked major ass in the 80s. Not even Mattel can take that away from me. Well, Mr. Orlando Olivero, what a great letter. Again, you guys, I'm humbled when I get letters like this. I mean, you know, it's funny because I think that there's got to be a psychological condition with people like yourself and with me, longtime fans that are watching these franchises that have literally been part of our world for decades. They get rebooted by people that are seemingly ill-qualified to do so, and the resulting shows are not good. They're just not good. And the worst part about it is then by talking about how these shows aren't good, we are told that we aren't good fans, that we are somehow bad people that just don't understand. And I have to tell you, I mean, it really makes me want to pull my teeth out with pliers. I was hoping to hang on to my own choppers until I'm going into the grave. But sometimes these kinds of things make me that angry. I want to get pliers and just tear out my teeth, Marathon Man style. I mean, maybe I should use a drill instead. But it just makes me angry, and you've thought a lot about it. And you can even recognize the early aughts Masters of the Universe was a really good show. I take your word for it. I'm not as I've talked, I missed the Masters of the Universe bug. I did buy the original figures I thought were cool because they were unique. I hadn't seen figures like that, and they look cool on my shelf in my bedroom. I bought them before I'd seen the show, and once I saw the show, I didn't need to see it, not to take away from your fandom. I just think I was a little old to be affected by it. I did work on a He-Man documentary called Toy Masters that got held up for a number of reasons. I was an additional editor on that film that Roger Lay Jr. Was making with Corey Landis. A great movie, I think. I really like the film about the two men who have been arguing about who created He-Man for years. So I feel your pain. This terrific letter. I think we always are dealing. We're now seeing what I think the most maddening thing about all of this is that the creators that take on these franchises when they don't seem to have a particular affinity for these franchises and they just kind of take over, we wonder why. And they're paying them. They're doing it for money. If anybody came to me and said, you know what? They already did Gem and the Holograms. If somebody offered me Strawberry Shortcake, somebody said, Rob, I'm going to pay you $1 million to direct or to develop a Strawberry Shortcake animated series, I'd say, fuck yeah, man. I will bring back Strawberry Shortcake in a big way. I will make Strawberry Shortcake shorted out for modern audiences. I don't even know anything about Strawberry Shortcake. I just know the name. I know there was a toy line or whatever. Was there an animated series? I just assumed there was. But given a choice, I'd make a killer. By the way, I would make a killer Strawberry Shortcake series because I would take the time to go learn about the mythology and find out. I would Nick Meyer it. Nick Meyer didn't know anything about Star Trek before he was going to make Star Trek 2, and he went and learned. I'd go watch every episode. I'd figure out what is the Strawberry Shortcake canon. How can we make a canonical show that has fealty to the original, but still takes the characters, still takes that young Strawberry Shortcake as a person, I think, right? Well, it takes Strawberry Shortcake into realms and lands and places she's never gone, but it pays respect to the original, and it pays respect to the entire franchise as a whole. So it would look like it was canonical. It would have round nacelles. Oh, I mean, wait, sorry. Different show. But again, fantastic letter. Thank you for writing it in. And I think a lot of us, it speaks to the larger issue of what we are dealing with. You get these people, who's not going to take the job? If somebody offers you money, of course you're going to take the job. Star Trek Discovery has become, the most expensive television show ever made. Nobody talks about it. And it is not, I know, Emmy, if you're watching, I understand you love Star Trek Discovery, and I don't ever want to take away from what Star Trek Discovery is to people. But it's actually, I believe it's, as a show, look, the future of Star Trek will live and die based on what they do with Picard. It really will. It should be a canonical Star Trek show. If it is not, and if they've basically turned Picard into a character that he's not, it'll be really interesting to see. But for me, modern Star Trek, if the Picard series is more of Discovery, I'm out. My interest in Star Trek, it's going to be interesting. I've been hanging on, clinging to my interest in Star Trek over the last decade, but there's only so much abuse you can take. So much intellectual abuse, so much of abuse that my love has taken hits on over the last 10 years. But if Star Trek Picard is not good, I'm out. I can actually say I no longer have to care about Star Trek. I don't have to think about it anymore. I'm out. And I mean, I'll watch it, but I don't, maybe I won't even watch it. I don't know. Oh man, the Fleece says, buy anything in the Indicator Blu-ray sale. I didn't even know they had a Blu-ray sale. Ugh. I love Indicator. Indicator, by the way, is putting out a Grail disc for me. They're putting out Alan Parker's Birdie Birdie with Matthew Modine and Nicolas Cage. Oh, God, I love that movie so much. I've had the DVD. They're putting it out on Blu-ray. I cannot wait. For those of you who don't know, Indicator is a British Blu-ray company that handles a lot of Columbia titles. And a lot of the Columbia titles that were kind of put out by Twilight Time, they're doing new transfers. Indicator is a fantastic physical media label. They are amazing. They put out great, great stuff. If you like any of their movies, you should buy them. You can get them from Amazon UK. I believe they're region free. Indicator is a fantastic video label. So anything they put out, it gets my highest recommendation. They really know what they're doing. The transfers are incredible. I didn't know they were having an Indicator Blu-ray sale. You know what? I have to look. Not that I have, because of a certain mishap today, I don't even have a dime. So, but anyway, it would be great to be involved in the Indicator Blu-ray sale. I didn't know that, but I recommend that everybody buys any. If you're into physical media, buy any Indicator disc. They're great. Now, this is an interesting letter. This is a letter that comes from Martin Lawrence, and he writes in from the United Kingdom. I wonder if he knows Terry. Greetings and salutations, Rob. I wanted to send this letter regarding how and why we mourn the loss of a film star. I get the process of grief we have when it's a friend, a colleague, or a loved one, but why a film star? This is someone we have never met and who wouldn't know us from Adam. I remember where I was when I heard the news of the passing of Robin Williams. To this day, I still feel a lingering sadness for the loss. The same was for the death of the great Peter Cushing. I never met these people, but I still felt their passing as if I did. Maybe it's because we let those people into our lives through the mediums of TV and film. I would love to get your thoughts on this. Yours sincerely, Martin L. Well, Martin L., I think that obviously Peter Fonda, that's on these letters, by the way, are on the website. You can respond to them. I think you answered your own question. Look, when it came to Star Trek, one of when Leonard Nimoy passed away, I mean, I've actually had met him and been to his house, but Leonard Nimoy felt like a member. When I watch movies, Nimoy felt like my father, my grandfather or something. I've been watching him literally my whole life. And it's interesting when we have favorite actors, and even if we follow their career, there's something about them that they live on in our memories, sometimes more strongly than people that are part of our immediate family. We incorporate them into our lives. Especially if you've been watching them your whole life. I mean, the Corleone family, I always say that they're my friends. Like, I know the Corleone family. When Al Pacino passes away, God forbid, it would be a huge loss. I've never met Al Pacino, but I've loved so many performances that by the way, Cruising came out on Blu-ray. I've had so many movies that Al Pacino has been in. When Roy Scheider passed away, I felt terrible because All That Jazz is one of my favorite movies of all time. I loved him in Romeo is Bleeding, of course. I love Roy Scheider. Somebody asked on the John Campea show if I have the 7-Ups on Blu-ray. I do. I think that's why there are actors that we incorporate, all of us. We have certain favorite actors for whatever reason, and they live on in our psyches. And we actually, when they're gone, you just take it for granted that they're still there. You can always go revisit their movies, but in the back of your mind, you know they're out there in the world. And when you find out you're never going to get another movie or a TV show that these people are in, there's something that I think it is emotional. And it's funny, just because we might not know somebody in the flesh, like certainly you're from the UK, when Princess Di was killed, I mean, the royal family and the relationship people have to the royal family and what the royal family has meant to people over the years. I know everyone's going to get all cynical and all that, and you can, but I didn't have that connection to Princess Di, but I certainly read about it with people who did. You know, there's a constant in your life. There's public figures that I've never met that mean a lot to me. And when you find out that they're gone and you'll never read news about them, you'll never see a picture about them or somewhere online, it can be sad. And I think that's only natural. I think we do develop relationships even with people that we don't necessarily know. Through their work, they become like, I can't imagine a world without Stephen King. I've been reading Stephen King books since elementary school, and I can't wait. He has a new book coming out called The Institute, and I can't wait to read it. You know, and with his movies, It and The Stand coming out, the TV miniseries, which I'm just can't wait to see. If Stephen King was ever not here in my lifetime, I would acutely feel it. I have shelves full of Stephen King books. You know, I'll watch any interview he gives. I'll read any article, anything about Stephen King. I mean, I feel like I know Stephen King. I've never met him. I've met a lot of my favorite authors and had them. The only autographs I collect are authors, book authors. I've always collected in my storage locker mishap. My large collection of first edition dark fantasy books disappeared. Yes, I'd forgotten to pay. I switched over. I had a storage locker for 12 years. There was a lot of stuff in that storage locker that was worth a lot of money. But one of my favorite things that was in my storage locker was my collection of first edition hardcover books. And I had there because I'd moved around and I just didn't have anywhere to put them all. And I did not know, because of stories like Hoarders or you know, people, the shows where all those storage locker shows. So I had this locker for 12 years and I paid for it, you know, diligently. And it was auto pay. And there was a confluence of events that I got a new debit card and I just forgot to call them. And it's one of those things because I didn't think about it. 45 days late, I owed $500. It's $250 a year, $250 a month. And I didn't pay it. I didn't know. And then I realized, hey, I haven't paid for my storage locker. I called up, and the people that worked at this place for the 12 years that I was there, they had gone and they had new management, and they didn't know me. They didn't have any. They're just like, no, you know, your storage locker. Blah, 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 blah. So they auctioned off my storage locker with, I would say, $150,000 worth of stuff in it. All of it was organized and packed up, and I even had my friend Dave Hargrove and I once spent an entire day. He wanted to help me just organizing the rows. I had rows of stuff in my storage locker so I could get to everything. Every single Bandai, every single Yamato Valkyrie from Robotech Macross, the 1/48 scales. Go look up how much those were. I had like 20 of them. It's all the Lego Star Wars collector sets, the originals, the TIE Interceptor, the X-Wing. I had all of them. It was, yeah, it's horrifying. And why am I telling that story? I don't know why, but one day the funny thing is when I called, they had already auctioned my storage locker off, and I had no recourse. And I'm like, I was a customer here for 12 years. And here's another thing. This is how the world is now. I'm finishing. I'll tell you this cautionary tale. The rent they could get for my storage locker was way higher than what I was paying. They could get like $500 a month now. But since I'd been there for so long, I was rent controlled. They still raised my rent, but they couldn't. They had to honor the contract I had. They wanted me gone because it was just about turnover. They didn't understand that my entire hardcover dark fantasy first edition, I had like all of Stephen King's Dark Tower books. I had first editions of Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire. All Clive Barker's original first edition British books, including the Books of Blood and Damnation Game, signed, all of them signed. They did not know that I had like my entire collectible life was in this storage thing. And it was after I had gotten divorced, you know, and so all of it was gone. Like literally all of it was, I had every single Star Trek novel ever published in mint condition. Each one was individually wrapped and gone. All of it. And they've been books I've been literally collecting for at the time. This happened you know when it happened? It happened when I was interviewing Patrick Stewart in New York for Star Trek The Next Generation, which is kind of ironic. And it took me, I felt this horrible loss. I get angry every night for like 6 months. I didn't go to a therapist or anything. Anyway, that's just an aside. I don't know why I'm telling you that story, but it was pretty horrifying. Like, even though I have a lot of stuff, I lost, go look this up. I had all of the Hot Toys Rocky figures. I had every Hot Toy that up to that point was put out, most of them. I had all of the original Hot Toys Aliens Marines, and they didn't have but go look up how much those figures cost now. Horrifying. The amount of stuff, all of my die-cast Soul of Chogokin robots. Terrifying. I was depressed for a while. I had to walk around in a daze, and people are like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "I don't have any of my Japanese super robots anymore." Okay, there you go. I'm totally out in the weeds. I don't even know what I'm saying, but it was really sad, and it bummed me out for a long time. There was nothing I could do. Nothing I could do. Anyway, there you go. There's some honest soul searching. I'm getting all sad. This happened back in 2012. Mark C says, when Harrison Ford passes away, I'll need a month to mourn. I know, man. I mean, you think about a guy like Harrison Ford. How do you get over that? How do you get over that kind of a loss? Indiana Jones, Han Solo, the President of the United States, Get Off My Plane, Jack Ryan. I mean, I showed Elizabeth Presumed Innocent, where he plays Rusty Savage. And I love him in that. I'm going to watch Frantic because it takes place in Paris. Roman Polanski directed it. That'll be a tough one. That'll be a tough one to get over. I mean, he was in Apocalypse Now. He's like a constant in my life, and that'll be terrible when he's gone. So you guys understand. And on that bright and sunny and cheery note, I'm going to bring this episode number 204 of Robservations, a show about something, bring it to an end on this Friday. First of all, it's very exciting. I want to thank the moderators. I want to thank Detective Jim. I want to thank Greg. I want to thank Mike Bodden, the Honorable Mike Bodden. But I especially want to thank and welcome back Terry to the fold, our D'Artagnan, back from his Grail quest. It's good to have him back. And remember, Terry, April 2nd or 3rd, we have to figure out, is there going to be preview shows Thursday night for No Time to Die? We'll figure that out. Glad to have you back, sir. Glad to have you here. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel, both through whether it's super chats, whether it's joining up on the website, or just sending letters. You guys have been making this channel, for me, even much more exciting to do because the commentary and the letters that you're sending in are great. And I love it. I just want to thank you and all the people that are subscribing. I hope, here's a shout out to all you new subscribers here. Some of you are thinking, what the hell is this? But anyway, this is what it is. This is the Post-Geek Singularity. And you, if you're watching now, you're watching because you are an imagination connoisseur. Thank you very much for watching. And as I always say, I will always end my chats with, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you need to do is listen. And with that, I bid you farewell. I will be back on the John Campy Show on Monday, and I'll be back here all weekend. Everybody. Have a better day.